Darius Williams, at 38 years old, understood the quiet hum of a life built on modest, achievable goals. His salary as a community college math instructor was a predictable $54,000 a year, a number that felt both solid and profoundly limiting. He lived in the upstairs unit of a duplex in the historic Tremé neighborhood of New Orleans, a property his grandmother, his beloved Mama B, had left him. It wasn't a palace, but its cypress bones were soaked in the history of his family, of jazz funerals and second lines parading right past the front door. It was his. And on this Thanksgiving afternoon, sitting in his brother-in-law's sterile, oversized living room, that sense of ownership felt like the only thing he truly possessed. The air in the $1.2 million Lakeview McMansion was chilled to a precise 68 degrees, a stark contrast to the humid warmth of a New Orleans November. It was an environment as curated and emotionally distant as its owner, Tasha's brother, Marcus. Marcus stood at the head of a massive 12-foot mahogany dining table that had cost, as Tasha had breathlessly informed Darius, a staggering $14,000. He was carving a 22-pound turkey with an electric knife that whirred with obnoxious efficiency. Marcus, a man whose suit started at $3,000 and whose smile never quite reached his eyes, was the sun around which Tasha's world revolved. Darius, in his $80 department store slacks and a simple button-down shirt, felt like a distant, irrelevant moon. "Another perfect bird, son," Marcus's father said, raising his glass of 20-year-old scotch, a $300 bottle opened for the occasion. Tasha, Darius's wife of 4 years, sat beside him. Her deep brown skin, usually so warm and radiant, seemed to absorb the cold light of the room. She was wearing a silk dress that cost more than Darius's bi-weekly paycheck, a shimmering $2,800 garment that made her look like a stranger. She hadn't looked at him, not really, since they arrived in their 2012 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles on the odometer, parking it apologetically behind Marcus's gleaming new black Porsche Cayenne, a $90,000 monument to his success in commercial real estate. The table was laden with food, but an unspoken tension soured the air. It was a familiar feeling, the annual gathering where Darius's quiet stability was held up against Marcus's explosive wealth and found wanting. He was used to the subtle digs, the patronizing questions about his little college, the feigned interest in his students. He had learned to swallow it, to retreat into a quiet space in his mind where the geometry of his life made sense, even if no one else saw its elegance. But what came next, he could not swallow. Marcus finished his carving, placing a perfect slice of white meat onto his fiancée's plate. He then held up the platter. "Who wants what?" he boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room with its 20-foot ceilings. Tasha sighed, a sound so full of theatrical despair that it commanded the attention of the entire table. She stared at the two men, her husband, the quiet math teacher, and her brother, the conquering hero of finance. The silence stretched. Then she turned her gaze not to Darius, but to her mother, seated across the table. Her voice, when it came, was clear, cold, and carried the deliberate weight of a wrecking ball. "You know, Mama," Tasha said, a bitter little smile playing on her lips. "Sometimes I think I should have married your brother." She didn't say which brother. She didn't have to. Every eye at the table, all 12 of them, flickered from Marcus's triumphant smirk to Darius's stunned face. The words hung in the refrigerated air, brutal and absolute. Wrong brother, wrong life, wrong everything. It wasn't just an insult. It was a public declaration of his inadequacy, a final verdict on their marriage, delivered in front of the two families. Darius felt the blood drain from his face. The whir of the electric knife had stopped, but a high-pitched ringing started in his ears. He looked at Tasha, his wife, and saw only a stranger who had just gutted him in the heart of her family's palace. He had no idea, in that moment of profound humiliation, that this was not the deepest betrayal she was capable of. He had no idea what was coming. Have you ever been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to love you the most? Tell us your story in the comments below, because sharing can be the first step toward reclaiming your power. The marriage hadn't always been a stage for public humiliation. In the beginning, there was a facade of domestic normalcy, a carefully constructed play where they were just a regular couple building a life. But even then, the cracks were there. Tiny fissures of financial resentment that Darius had tried his best to ignore. He remembered the day they went shopping for a sofa, about 6 months after their wedding. They had walked into a high-end furniture store in the warehouse district, a place that smelled of expensive leather and polished wood. Tasha had fallen in love with a sprawling, cloud-like sectional sofa in a shade of cream that seemed destined for stains. It was a piece from Restoration Hardware, and its price tag read $5,250. "Isn't it perfect, baby?" she had whispered, running her hand over the luxurious fabric. "Can you just imagine it in the living room? It would change everything." Darius did the math in his head. $5,250 was nearly 3 of his monthly paychecks. It was an impossible sum. "Tasha, it's beautiful, but we can't afford this," he said gently, his voice low so the salesperson hovering nearby wouldn't hear. "That's more than my emergency fund." Her face fell. The light in her eyes, which had been sparkling with desire, flickered out. "But Marcus just bought a whole living room set for 20 grand, she muttered, the comparison slipping out as naturally as a breath. He didn't even blink. "We're not Marcus, Tasha," Darius had replied, the words feeling tired even then. They ended up at a more modest furniture store on the West Bank, buying a perfectly nice, sturdy gray sofa for $1,200. Darius paid for it with his credit card, planning to pay it off over the next 6 months. As the delivery men set it up in their living room, the upstairs unit of his duplex, with its charming but slightly uneven wood floors, he tried to feel a sense of accomplishment. They had a new sofa. They were making a home. But Tasha looked at the $1,200 sofa with a quiet, simmering disappointment. To her, it wasn't a symbol of their shared effort. It was a monument to their limitations. It was a constant, plush, gray reminder that she had settled. He would often find her scrolling through Marcus's social media feed on her $1,100 iPhone, her face illuminated by pictures of his brother's latest acquisition, a boat, a trip to Bali, a new watch that cost more than their Camry. The silence in the room would be thick with her unspoken dissatisfaction. Their home in the Tremé was a place of deep meaning for Darius. He'd grown up visiting his Mama B there, listening to her stories of the neighborhood, of the musicians and artists who had lived on their street. The house itself was a classic shotgun duplex, long and narrow. The downstairs unit had been vacant since his grandmother passed, a space filled with dusty furniture and memories. He and Tasha lived upstairs, in a 2-bedroom unit he'd lovingly repainted himself. He'd spent weekends refinishing the original heart pine floors, his hands sore, but his heart full. He saw the house not as an asset to be leveraged, but as a legacy to be cherished. Tasha saw it as a prison. "This place is so small," she'd complain, standing by the window that overlooked the vibrant, sometimes noisy street. "And it's old. I heard the floorboards creak again last night. Why don't we sell it? We could get a good price, maybe $500,000. We could use that for a down payment on a real house, in Lakeview, or even Metairie." "This is a real house, Tasha," Darius would say, looking up from his laptop where he was preparing lesson plans for his algebra students. He'd sit at their small, $200 IKEA dining table, the only one that would fit in the space. My grandmother left it to me. It's paid off. We live here for free, other than taxes and insurance. Do you have any idea what a gift that is? It's not a gift if it's holding us back, she'd snap. Her words were sharp, designed to cut. She saw his sentimentality as a weakness, a character flaw that was costing her the life she believed she deserved, the life her brother had. The cruelty became more frequent, more casual, as if she were practicing for the main event at Thanksgiving. One evening, about a year before the disastrous holiday dinner, she came home from her job as a manager at a luxury boutique in the French Quarter. She tossed her $1,500 Louis Vuitton purse onto the gray sofa with a thud. "I just can't do this anymore, Darius," she announced. He looked up, concerned. "Do what? Did something happen at work?" "No. This," she said, gesturing around their cozy, book-filled living room. "This life. My friend Janine at work, her husband just got a promotion. He's a pharmacist, and they're moving into a gated community in Mandeville. And I'm married to a community college math instructor. A math instructor. Darius, you're 38 years old. Marcus is 35, and he just closed a 7-figure deal. He's flying his fiancée to Paris for her birthday next month. On a private jet." "Good for him," Darius said, his voice flat. He refused to be drawn into the comparison game. "I'm proud of my job. I help people who are trying to get a better life. People who didn't have the advantages Marcus had." She laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Oh, please. You're teaching basic fractions to adults for $54,000 a year? You're not changing the world? You're stuck. And you're keeping me stuck with you." Each word was a carefully aimed stone, and they all hit their mark. He felt a familiar, dull ache in his chest. The outrage accumulated in small, painful doses, a slow poisoning of the love he thought they had. He started to see that her love was conditional, its currency measured in square footage and brand names. He was a good man, a kind man, a steady man. But in Tasha's ledger, his goodness was worthless. It couldn't be spent. He had no idea that she had already found a way to cash in on the one valuable thing he possessed, without his knowledge or consent. The foundation of their life together was not just cracked, it was built on a sinkhole of deceit, and it was about to swallow him whole. The pressure began subtly, a few weeks after that Thanksgiving. It started with Marcus. He began visiting the duplex more often, showing up unannounced on Saturday afternoons when Darius was grading papers. He'd walk through the downstairs unit, his expensive Italian leather shoes, a $900 pair of Testonis, scuffing against the dusty floors. "You know, D," he'd say, using a nickname that sounded wrong coming from him. "You're sitting on a gold mine here." He'd tap a wall with his knuckles. "The bones are good. Location is everything in this city, and Tremé is hot right now. You could get $500,000 for this place, easy. Maybe more if you fixed it up." Darius would just nod. "I like it the way it is, Marcus. It has history." "History doesn't pay the bills," Marcus would counter with a slick smile. "Assets should be working for you, not just sitting there gathering dust. You gotta think like an investor." He treated Darius not like a brother-in-law, but like a particularly slow client who couldn't grasp the brilliant advice he was offering for free. His suggestions were always criticisms in disguise, each one a small erosion of Darius's authority in his own home. Then Tasha would pick up the thread. Her approach was more emotional, more manipulative. She'd bring it up late at night when he was tired and his defenses were down. "Baby, Marcus has this great idea," she began one evening, curling up next to him on the sofa. She was trying to be affectionate, a tactic she hadn't used in months. "It's for us, for our future." Darius felt a familiar prickle of unease. "What idea?" "He thinks we should add him to the deed on the duplex," she said, her voice a smooth, practiced caress. Just on paper, for tax reasons. He says he can use it as leverage to secure financing for a new development project. He'd give us a percentage of the profits. A big percentage. It would be our nest egg, Darius. The start of a real life. Darius sat up straight. Add him to the deed? To my grandmother's house? Tasha, no, absolutely not. The request felt fundamentally wrong, a violation of something sacred. The house was his last tangible connection to Mama B, to a simpler, more honest world. Tasha's soft demeanor vanished instantly. Her face hardened. Why are you so difficult? Why can't you see a golden opportunity when it's staring you in the face? This is what I'm talking about. You have no vision, no ambition. Marcus is trying to help us, and you're too proud or too stupid to accept it. It's not about pride, Darius said, his voice quiet but firm. It's my house. It was my grandmother's house. The discussion is over. But it wasn't over. For the next 2 weeks, it was a constant two-front assault. Marcus would text him articles about New Orleans real estate trends, with notes like, "See, market's peaking, time to act." Tasha would cycle between pleading, anger, and the cold, silent treatment. She'd leave brochures for new housing developments in Lakeview on his pillow. She'd talk loudly on the phone with her mother about how Darius just doesn't understand money. The pressure was immense, suffocating. He felt like they were trying to wear him down, to break his will. And it was that relentless, coordinated campaign that finally flipped a switch in his mind. Why were they so desperate? If it was just a tax thing, why the full court press? The story didn't add up. The numbers were wrong, and as a math teacher, Darius knew that when the numbers were wrong, the entire equation was a lie. A cold dread began to form in the pit of his stomach. He decided to stop arguing and start investigating. He told Tasha, "Okay, fine, I'll think about it. Let me look into the logistics." The relief on her face was so immediate, so triumphant, that it confirmed his suspicions. She thought she had won. They had no idea what he was about to do. The following Tuesday, at 10:15 a.m., Darius took a personal day from the college. He drove his Camry not to a bank or a financial advisor, but to the Orleans Parish Clerk of Court's office on Loyola Avenue. The building was a formidable block of granite and glass, a place of official records and hard truths. He walked into the Land Records Division on the 4th floor. The air inside was cool and smelled of old paper and ozone from the humming copy machines. He gave the clerk at the counter the address of his duplex in Tremé. "I'd like to see the most recent documents filed for this property, please," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. The clerk, a kind-faced woman with intricate braids adorned with small gold beads, typed the address into her computer. "Williams, Darius," she read. "Okay, I see the original act of sale to your grandmother in 1968, and the succession document transferring title to you. Let's see. 5 years ago?" She squinted at the screen. "Oh, and there's a quitclaim deed filed after that." Darius's heart hammered against his ribs. "A quitclaim deed?" "Yes," she said, turning the monitor toward him. "Filed 3 years ago. It looks like you transferred the property to a Marcus Thorne." Tasha's maiden name was Thorne. Marcus Thorne. The room tilted. 3 years ago. That was just 6 months after their wedding. 6 months after the argument about the $5,250 sofa. "Can I see it?" Darius asked, his mouth dry. The clerk printed a copy and handed it to him. He paid the $1 fee with a trembling hand. He stared down at the document. It was a single page. It declared that Darius Williams, for the sum of $10 and love and affection, did hereby remise, release, and forever quitclaim the property to Marcus Thorne. And there, At the bottom was his signature. Or what was supposed to be his signature. It was a good forgery. The slant was right, the letters were formed correctly, but it was too perfect, too smooth. His own signature was always a little bit rushed, the I in Williams barely dotted. This one was meticulously crafted. It was the signature of someone trying to copy his name, not the unconscious scrawl of the man who owned it. Below the signature was a notary stamp and another signature, a name he had never seen before, Julian C. Webb. He felt the floor drop out from under him. The air rushed from his lungs. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a proposal. It was already done. Years ago. His wife, the woman he had vowed to love and cherish, had conspired with her brother to steal his home, his grandmother's home. The pressure to add Marcus to the deed wasn't about the future. It was about covering up the past. They were trying to get him to knowingly sign onto a fraud they had already committed, legitimizing their theft after the fact. He stood in the middle of the land records office, a $1 piece of paper in his hand that represented the total annihilation of his trust. The casual cruelty, the years of belittling comments, the Thanksgiving insult, it all snapped into focus. It wasn't just dissatisfaction. It was the calculated contempt of a thief for her victim. He walked out of the building into the glaring New Orleans sun, a man who had just discovered he was a ghost in his own life. The drive back to the Tremé was a blur. Darius parked the Camry in its usual spot behind the duplex, the engine ticking as it cooled. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time, the forged quitclaim deed lying on the passenger seat like a venomous snake. The initial shock was hardening into something else, something cold and clear. It was the feeling a mathematician gets when, after hours of struggle, the chaotic variables of a complex problem suddenly align, revealing a single, elegant, and devastating solution. The problem was the betrayal. The solution would be justice. He knew one thing with absolute certainty. He could not confront them. Not yet. A confrontation would be emotional, messy. It would give them a chance to lie, to manipulate, to gaslight him. Tasha would cry. Marcus would bluster and threaten. They would destroy the evidence and disappear into the fog of a legal battle he couldn't afford. No. The key to solving this equation was to control the variables. He had to play dumb. He had to become an actor in the final scene of his own marriage. He walked upstairs, his footsteps heavy on the stairs he'd so lovingly refinished. He hid the copy of the deed inside a thick textbook, a copy of Advanced Calculus, 3rd edition. No one would ever look there. That evening, Tasha came home, humming a little tune. She was in a good mood, believing she had finally broken him. She dropped her purse on the sofa, the $1,200 gray sofa that was a constant source of her resentment, and came over to him, draping her arms around his neck. "Hey, baby," she said, her voice sweet as sugar cane. "Did you have a good day?" He had to force himself not to flinch. He turned, summoning a smile that felt like it was cracking his face. "It was fine. Taught a couple of classes." "You?" "Great day," she said. "We got a new shipment of Chanel bags at the store, the $8,000 ones. They're gorgeous." She paused, then looked at him with a hopeful, expectant expression. "So, did you happen to think any more about, you know?" This was it, the first test. He had to lie, and he had to make it believable. He feigned a thoughtful expression, rubbing his chin. "Yeah, I did," he said slowly, as if weighing a difficult decision. "You know, I was thinking, you and Marcus are right. I'm not a money guy. I'm good with numbers, but not this kind of thing, leveraging assets." He used their own jargon, feeding it back to them. "It sounds interesting. I guess I'm just nervous about the process. What are the logistics?" Her face lit up with a blinding, triumphant smile. It was the most genuine happiness he had seen from her in years, and it was all because she believed he was surrendering his legacy. The sight of it filled him with an icy calm. "Oh, baby, that's wonderful," she exclaimed, hugging him tightly. He stood stiffly in her embrace, his mind a million miles away. "Don't you worry about a thing. Marcus will handle everything. He's already got a lawyer who can draw up the paperwork. It'll be so easy." He felt a surge of nausea. A lawyer to draw up paperwork for a crime they'd already committed. It was all a show, a puppet theater designed to make him the fool. "Okay," he said, his voice a masterpiece of feigned reluctance. "Yeah. Okay, let's do it." Over the next few weeks, Darius lived a double life. By day, he was the same quiet, dedicated math instructor. He lectured on differential equations and held office hours for struggling students, finding solace in the clean, irrefutable logic of his subject. But in the evenings and on weekends, he was a man gathering evidence, meticulously building a case against his own wife. His first step was to secure his own legal counsel. He didn't want the kind of lawyer Marcus would use, some flashy corporate attorney from a big downtown firm. He needed someone who understood the city, someone who understood property, and someone who would fight for him. He found her through a recommendation from a colleague, Ms. Alana Dubois, a real estate litigator, whose office was in a beautifully restored historic building in the central business district. Ms. Dubois was a sharp, impeccably dressed black woman in her late 40s. Her office was filled with law books and modern art, a space that radiated competence and success. Her hair was styled in elegant, intricate locks, and her gaze was direct and intelligent. Darius, feeling out of his depth in his simple instructor clothes, laid his documents on her massive mahogany desk. He presented the original 1968 deed, his grandmother's name typed on the fragile paper. He showed her the official document of succession that proved his sole ownership. Then, he placed the forged quitclaim deed next to them. Finally, he produced his notarized signature card from his bank, a document he'd had on file for over a decade. Ms. Dubois put on a pair of sleek, black-framed glasses and examined the signatures. She spent a long time comparing the forged signature on the quitclaim to the dozen legitimate ones on his bank card and other documents. The silence in the room was absolute. Finally, she looked up at him, her expression grim. "Mr. Williams," she said, her voice crisp, "this is one of the most brazen forgeries I've seen in a long time. They were sloppy or arrogant, probably both." She quoted her fee, $650 per hour. It was a terrifying number, but Darius didn't hesitate. He had about $8,000 in a savings account he'd been building for years. He wrote her a check for a $5,000 retainer. It was almost everything he had. "What do we do?" Darius asked. "We do nothing," she said, her calm demeanor a balm to his frayed nerves. "We don't confront them. We don't tip our hand. We let them think they have won. Let them proceed. Let them try to sell the property. They will walk themselves right into the trap. The first thing we need is a formal, expert opinion." She arranged for a forensic document examiner, a man who had previously worked for the FBI. His fee was another $2,500, which Ms. Dubois paid out of the retainer. Darius provided the expert with over 50 examples of his signature from the past 10 years, checks, tax returns, college documents. While he waited for the results, he had to continue the charade at home. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. He had to sit on the hated gray sofa next to Tasha and watch television, pretending everything was normal. He had to listen to her talk about the new life they were going to have, the house they would buy with the money Marcus was going to make for them. Each word was a twist of the knife. He knew he needed more than just the forgery. He needed to prove intent. He needed to hear it from her own mouth. He went to an electronics store and bought a small, high-quality digital voice recorder for $150. It was tiny, easily concealable. One night he started a new conversation. He sat at the IKEA dining table, the recorder hidden in his shirt pocket. "Tasha," he began, his voice carefully calibrated to sound confused and a little helpless. "Can you explain this whole thing to me again? I just want to understand. You want to give Marcus the house?" She sighed, the sound of a patient teacher dealing with a slow student. "Darius, we're not giving it to him. It's an investment vehicle. He's going to use its value." Darius interrupted, playing his part. "But the paperwork Marcus's lawyer is supposedly sending over, it's a transfer of ownership, right? It feels like I'm just handing it over." Tasha finally lost her patience. The condescension she'd been holding back came pouring out. "Oh my God, you just don't get it, do you? You don't understand money. Look, it's complicated, okay? The truth is, I sort of already did it. Symbolically." Darius held his breath. "What do you mean, you already did it?" "When Marcus got engaged, I told him the duplex was my gift to him and his fiancée," she said, her voice rising in frustration. "It was a gesture, a way of showing them that we are a family that supports each other. It was supposed to be a surprise for you, a way for us to finally get ahead by letting him manage our only real asset. I had a document drawn up to make it look official for them. It wasn't supposed to be a real thing until you agreed." It was a waterfall of lies, but embedded within it was the core of the truth she was trying to hide. "I had a document drawn up. The admission was there, recorded in crystal clear audio. He had her." He clicked the save button in his mind. Later that night, when she was asleep, he transferred the audio file to a secure folder on his laptop, naming it equation.mp3. The proof was complete. All he had to do now was wait for them to make their final, fatal move. The call from Ms. Dubois came 2 weeks later. "The report is in, Mr. Williams," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "It's conclusive. The examiner states with 100% certainty that the signature on the quitclaim deed is a forgery. He identified 27 points of dissimilarity. He's prepared to testify to that in court." Darius felt a wave of grim satisfaction. "So what's next?" "Now we wait for them to list the property for sale," she said. "My contact at the parish assessor's office will flag any activity. Once they have a buyer and a closing date, we act." The wait was agonizing. During this time, the final humiliation occurred. Marcus's fiancée, a woman named Chloe, who wore her wealth like a suit of armor, decided to host an engagement party. It was held at a trendy rooftop bar in the warehouse district that Marcus had partially invested in. The bill for the party alone, Darius overheard someone say, was over $30,000. Darius and Tasha arrived, and he was once again forced to endure the stark contrast between his world and theirs. He wore his one good suit, a simple navy blue one that had cost him $400. Marcus was in a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that probably cost $8,000. Tasha, again, was dressed in a designer gown, a shimmering, backless number that clung to her like a second skin. She left his side the moment they arrived, melting into the crowd of beautiful, wealthy people. Darius stood alone by the bar, nursing a club soda. He watched his wife laugh and flirt, the life of the party. She was in her element, a world away from their small apartment and his $54,000 salary. Later in the evening, Marcus stood on a small stage to give a toast. He raised a glass of champagne, the bubbles catching the light. "I want to thank you all for coming," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "And I especially want to thank my beautiful fiancée, Chloe. But there's one other person I have to thank tonight. My sister, Tasha." He turned and beamed at her. Tasha, standing near the stage, preened under the attention. "My sister has always believed in me," Marcus continued, his voice ringing with false sincerity. Even when I was just starting out? And to prove that belief, she recently gave me the most generous gift I have ever received. A foundation. A foundation on which Chloe and I can build our future. Tasha, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. He winked at her, a small conspiratorial gesture that no one else would understand. But Darius understood. He was talking about the duplex, his grandmother's home, and he was toasting the theft in a room full of people, with Darius standing right there. The crowd applauded politely. Tasha's eyes glistened with tears of joy. Darius had to clap along, his hands feeling like lead. The sound of his own applause was the most sickening sound he had ever heard. It was the sound of his own erasure. That night, something inside him broke for good. The part of him that still held a flicker of hope, a microscopic ember of the love he once felt, was finally extinguished. All that remained was the cold, hard certainty of his plan. He was no longer a victim. He was a strategist. A week later, the trap was sprung. Darius came home to find Tasha practically vibrating with excitement. "It's happening! It's happening!" she squealed, grabbing his hands. "Marcus got an offer on the duplex. A cash offer. Can you believe it?" "Wow," Darius said, his face a carefully constructed mask of surprise. "That was fast. How much?" $620,000, she said, the number tumbling from her lips like a jackpot. $620,000. Darius, do you know what this means? We can finally get out of here. We can buy a real house. Marcus said our cut will be over 200 grand. He knew their cut was just another lie, a carrot dangled to keep him compliant. But he played along. That's amazing, Tasha. "So we're on board, right? You're good with this?" she asked, her eyes searching his for any sign of hesitation. He looked at her, at the woman who had shared his bed for 4 years, the woman who had stolen his birthright and celebrated the theft in public. He thought of his grandmother. He thought of the quiet dignity of his life that she so openly despised. "Yes, Tasha," he said, his voice perfectly even. "I'm on board. You guys were right all along. I'm not good with this stuff. You and Marcus should handle it." The relief that washed over her was absolute. She hugged him, burying her face in his chest. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she whispered. "You won't regret this." He stood perfectly still, his arms limp at his sides. "Oh, I know I won't," he thought, "but you will." He had just given them the green light. He had just armed the bomb. And now, all he had to do was wait for the closing date, the day the entire fraudulent world they had built would detonate. The call came from Ms. Dubois on a Monday morning. "We have a date and time," she said. "Friday at 2:00 p.m. Title Guarantee Services, 71st floor of the Hancock Whitney Center on Poydras Street. The buyer is a shell corporation from out of state. Cash deal. They're trying to move fast and clean." "What do I need to do?" Darius asked, his heart starting to beat a steady, powerful rhythm. It wasn't anxiety, it was anticipation. "Just be ready. I've already spoken with the sheriff's office. They will have 2 deputies from the Economic Crimes Unit meet us in the lobby at 1:45. Wear a suit. Look the part of the man they wronged." The next few days were the longest of Darius's life. He continued his performance, playing the role of the clueless husband about to be rich. Tasha was giddy, spending hours online, looking at multi-million-dollar homes in the Garden District in Audubon. She talked about the cars they would buy, the vacations they would take. She was living in a fantasy, and Darius was the silent architect of its impending collapse. He packed a small bag with a change of clothes and some essentials, leaving it in the trunk of his Camry. He knew he would not be sleeping in that apartment again. Friday arrived, a bright, sunny New Orleans day. The kind of day that usually filled Darius with a sense of peace. Today, it felt like a spotlight, illuminating the stage for the final act. At noon, he left the college, telling his department head he had a family emergency. He drove home and changed into the navy blue suit he'd bought for $400. He looked at himself in the mirror. He didn't see a math instructor. He saw his grandmother's grandson, a man about to reclaim his family's honor. He met Ms. Dubois in the soaring marble-clad lobby of the Hancock Whitney Center at exactly 1:45 p.m. She was wearing a stunning charcoal gray power suit that probably cost $4,000, and she carried a slim, expensive-looking leather briefcase. Two uniformed deputies, a man and a woman, approached them. Ms. Dubois spoke to them in low, professional tones, handing them a file. They nodded grimly and positioned themselves discreetly by the elevator banks. "Are you ready, Mr. Williams?" Ms. Dubois asked him. Darius took a deep breath. "I'm ready." They rode the elevator to the 71st floor in silence. The view from the top was staggering, the entire city spread out below. The Mississippi River, a brown ribbon curving into the distance. It was a view meant to intimidate, to convey power. Today, Darius felt none of it. All he could feel was the cold, hard weight of the truth in his pocket. The offices of Title Guarantee Services were a hushed world of glass and steel. A receptionist led them to a large conference room. Through the glass wall, Darius could see them all. Marcus, looking smug and triumphant in an $8,700 Armani suit, sat at the head of the table. Beside him was his fiancée, Chloe, looking bored and beautiful. Across from them sat the buyer's representative and a realtor, and there, next to her brother, was Tasha. She was beaming, her skin glowing under the recessed lighting. She was wearing a white dress, as if she were a bride. The title agent, a harried-looking man in his 50s, was shuffling a mountain of paperwork. The final closing documents were spread across the table. Ms. Dubois opened the door, and they stepped inside. The chatter in the room stopped instantly. Every head turned. Tasha's smile froze, then melted into a confused frown. "Darius, what are you doing here? And who is this?" Marcus's face went from smug to irritated. "Darius, this is a private meeting. You're not needed here. We told you we'd handle it." Darius said nothing. He let Ms. Dubois take the lead. She walked calmly to the table and placed her leather briefcase on its polished surface with a soft click. "Good afternoon, everyone," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "My name is Alana Dubois, and I am the attorney for the legal owner of the property you are attempting to sell, Mr. Darius Williams." A nervous laugh escaped Marcus's lips. "What are you talking about?" "I'm the owner. My sister gifted me the property 3 years ago. The title is clean. We've been through all this." "I'm afraid you are mistaken," Ms. Dubois said, her tone icy. She opened her briefcase and began laying out documents one by one. "This is a certified copy of the original succession, granting Mr. Williams sole ownership of the property at 1218 Street, Phillip Street." She then placed the forged quitclaim deed next to it. "And this is a copy of the fraudulent quitclaim deed you filed on May 17th, 3 years ago, purporting to transfer ownership to yourself, Mr. Thorne." Marcus's face began to lose its color. "That's a perfectly legal document. Darius signed it." "No, he did not," Ms. Dubois countered. She laid down a third document. "This is a report from a certified forensic document examiner, confirming with 100% certainty that the signature on the deed is a forgery, a rather clumsy one at that." Tasha let out a small gasp. "Darius, no," she whispered, her eyes wide with panic. "What is this? Tell them it's a mistake." Darius finally looked at her. He felt nothing. No anger, no pain. just a vast, empty distance. And finally, Ms. Dubois said, her voice reaching a crescendo, "We have this." She pulled out a small digital player and pressed a button. Tasha's own voice filled the silent, glass-walled room. "I had a document drawn up to make it look official for them. It wasn't supposed to be a real thing until you agreed." The recorded voice was tinny but perfectly clear. It was an undeniable confession. Marcus shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was a mask of pure rage and panic. "This is insane. It's illegal. You can't record someone without their consent." "Louisiana is a one-party consent state, Mr. Thorne," Ms. Dubois stated flatly. "As a party to the conversation, Mr. Williams was perfectly within his rights. I believe we have established a clear case of felony property fraud, forgery, and conspiracy." The title agent had gone pale. He quickly gathered the closing documents and pushed them away as if they were contaminated. "This closing is terminated," he stammered. The buyer's representative and the realtor stood up and walked briskly out of the room without a word. It was then that the conference room door opened again. The two sheriff's deputies stepped inside. The sight of the uniforms shattered Marcus's bluster. The rage on his face collapsed into raw fear. "You can't be serious," he choked out. Tasha began to sob, her body shaking. "Darius, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't do this. We were doing it for us, for our future." Darius finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 4 years of accumulated pain and deceit. He looked directly at Tasha and repeated the words she had said to him, the words she thought were so clever. "It was just a gesture, Tasha," he said. "Symbolic." Her face crumpled. The male deputy stepped forward. "Marcus Thorne," he said, his voice official and final, "you are under arrest for suspicion of felony fraud and forgery. You have the right to remain silent." As the deputy cuffed her brother, Tasha lunged toward Darius, grabbing his arm. "Please, baby, don't let them do this. I love you. We can fix this." Darius pulled his arm away from her grasp, gently but firmly. He looked at the woman he had once loved, her expensive white dress now looking cheap and pathetic, her face streaked with tears and mascara. He looked at her, and for the first time in years, he felt truly free. He turned his back on her, on the wreckage of their life, and walked out of the room with Ms. Dubois, not looking back. The sound of Tasha's hysterical sobbing echoed behind him, but it was just noise now, the meaningless static of a life he was leaving behind, forever. The collapse was not a single event, but a cascade of consequences, each one a direct and logical result of the choices Tasha and Marcus had made. The justice Darius had sought was not emotional or vengeful, it was procedural, a series of dominoes falling with grim, mathematical precision. The first and most dramatic domino was Marcus. His arrest at the closing in a prestigious downtown law office was a spectacle. News of a prominent young real estate developer being led away in handcuffs for fraud spread through the city's tight-knit business community like wildfire. The story ran in the business section of the Times-Picayune, complete with a mugshot that showed Marcus looking stripped of all his arrogance, his expensive suit rumpled, his face pale and terrified. His firm, a high-powered commercial real estate brokerage, fired him within 24 hours, citing a morals and ethics clause in his $900,000 a year contract. The spectacular downfall of their rising star was a liability they couldn't afford. His fiancée, Chloe, who had witnessed the entire implosion, broke their engagement the next day via text message. The $45,000 cushion-cut diamond ring was returned to him by courier. His picture-perfect life, so carefully curated for public consumption, had been publicly and irrevocably shattered. Facing multiple felony charges, Marcus was forced to hire a top criminal defense attorney, a man whose retainer alone was $75,000. The legal fees mounted quickly, projected to exceed $150,000. With his income gone and his reputation destroyed, he had no choice but to sell the one thing that defined him, his $1.2 million Lakeview McMansion. The house sold quickly in a fire sale, for significantly less than its value, the proceeds immediately consumed by legal bills and the restitution he was ordered to pay Darius. He went from a Porsche-driving titan of industry to a man facing prison time, living in a small rented condo in a faceless suburban complex, his future a blank wall of uncertainty. The second domino was Tasha. The day after the closing, Darius filed for divorce. The proceedings were brutally swift and simple. Ms. Dubois presented the court with the forensic report and the audio recording of Tasha's confession. It was irrefutable proof of marital fraud. The judge, a stern woman who had seen it all, was not impressed by Tasha's tearful performance. Because the fraud was so egregious and involved the theft of Darius's premarital inherited property, the judge awarded Darius 100% of the Tremé duplex, ordering the fraudulent quitclaim deed to be permanently expunged from the parish records. Citing Tasha's role as a co-conspirator in a felony, the judge denied her any claim to spousal support or any of Darius's assets, including his modest retirement account. In the eyes of the law, her actions had nullified the financial partnership of their marriage. The scandal cost Tasha her job as well, the luxury boutique where she worked, a place that catered to the very society she so desperately wanted to join, quietly let her go. Her clients were the wives of the same men who now gossiped about her brother's arrest. She was toxic. Stripped of her husband, her income, and her social standing, Tasha was forced to move out of the duplex. She ended up in a cramped $900 a month apartment in Kenner, a world away from the Lakeview mansions she dreamed of. Her $1,500 handbags and designer dresses looked absurd in the tiny beige carpeted rooms. She was left with nothing but the consequences of her own greed. A smaller but significant domino was the notary public, Julian C. Webb. The investigation into the forged deed revealed that his notary stamp had appeared on dozens of other questionable property transfers. The sheriff's office and the Louisiana Secretary of State launched a full investigation. His notary license was permanently revoked, and he faced his own set of criminal charges for his role as a professional enabler of fraud. And then there was the duplex, Darius's duplex. With the title cleared and his ownership undisputed, the house on St. Philip Street was finally, fully his again. The cloud that had hung over it for 3 years had lifted. He spent the weekend after the divorce was finalized, walking through the empty upstairs apartment. He touched the walls, ran his hands over the wooden floors. He had purged his home of the lies it had been forced to hold. He hired a moving company to come and take every piece of furniture Tasha had ever picked out, including the $1,200 gray sofa. He sold it all online for a few $100s and donated the money to a local food bank. The space was empty, clean, and full of possibility. It was no longer just a house, it was the foundation of his new life, a life that would be built not on what he could acquire, but on what he could contribute. The equation of his life was finally balanced. 1 year later, the rain was falling softly on the tin roof of the duplex, a gentle rhythmic drumming that felt like a cleansing. The Tremé was quiet in the late afternoon downpour. Inside, however, the downstairs unit of 1218 St. Philip Street was anything but quiet. It was filled with the vibrant, chaotic energy of a dozen teenagers. The space, once dusty and forgotten, was now the home of the Tremé Math Project. The walls were painted a bright, cheerful yellow. Instead of his grandmother's old furniture, there were 6 large tables, A dozen gently used computers Darius had bought for $150 each from a university surplus sale, and whiteboards covered in algebraic equations. 3 afternoons a week, Darius opened his doors and offered free SAT and ACT prep, along with general math tutoring, to any teenager in the neighborhood who wanted it. Darius stood by a whiteboard, explaining the properties of a parabola to a small group of kids. He was wearing a simple polo shirt and jeans. He felt a sense of purpose that his old life, with its constant striving emptiness, had never offered. This was real. This was meaningful. His $54,000 salary hadn't changed, but he had never felt richer. A young woman named Imani, a brilliant high school senior with bright eyes and hair in beautiful, intricate cornrows, came up to him, holding a piece of paper. Her hands were trembling slightly. "Mr. D," she said, her voice a hushed whisper of awe. "I got it." She handed him the paper. It was an official acceptance letter to Howard University, her dream school. It included a substantial academic scholarship. Darius's eyes scanned the page, and a huge grin broke out across his face. "Imani, this is incredible," he said, his voice full of genuine pride. He gave her a big hug, and the other kids in the room erupted in applause. "I knew you could do it. I knew it." "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, her eyes welling up. "My math score went up 120 points. That's what got me the scholarship." In that moment, Darius understood true wealth. It wasn't a number in a bank account or the square footage of a house. It was this. It was the look on Imani's face. It was the ripple effect of investing in people, not property. It was building something that would outlast him. Later that evening, after the last student had left, he sat in his quiet, peaceful apartment upstairs. The furniture was simple but comfortable, pieces he had chosen himself. A sturdy wooden dining table he'd bought from a local craftsman for $800, a comfortable leather armchair that cost $950 where he read in the evenings. His life was his own. There was a drawing pinned to the corkboard in his small kitchen. Imani had given it to him a few weeks ago. It was a picture of him, drawn in crayon, standing in front of a whiteboard. He was smiling. She had carefully drawn his short, neat locks and his deep brown skin, a shade she had labeled Mr. D's color. In the drawing, he was surrounded by smiling kids, all of them black, all of them looking up at him. At the bottom, in big, bubbly letters, she had written, "Thanks, Mr. D. You showed us the math adds up." He thought of Tasha and Marcus. He had heard through the grapevine that Marcus had taken a plea deal and was serving an 18-month sentence in a low-security facility. Tasha was working as a waitress at a chain restaurant near the airport, her dreams of a Lakeview life reduced to clearing tables for tips. He felt no anger toward them anymore, only a distant pity. They had been trapped in a flawed equation, always trying to add things, money, status, possessions, to solve for happiness. They never understood that happiness isn't something you add. It's what remains after you've subtracted everything that doesn't matter. There's a profound strength in knowing your own value when the world, and even the people closest to you, try to tell you you're worthless. True wealth isn't about the assets you can leverage. It's about the legacy you build in the lives of others. It's about finding the quiet, elegant solution to the problem of how to live a good life. For Darius, the answer was simple. You give what you have. You teach what you know. You build up your community, one student, one equation at a time. And in doing so, you build a life of incalculable worth. Have you ever turned a painful experience into something positive for yourself or your community? Share your journey of transformation in the comments below. Let's inspire each other.